Today is all about weapons. Before we begin though, I want to give a shout out to the data miners Doc Holiday, Shang and Spider101 because they actually data mined and then put together these spreadsheets which show us a lot of stuff about the gear and the weapons in the game. Especially the one for the weapons is interesting for this video because it shows all the max damage values and the RPM and the reload speed and the optimal range and everything. All what I need to be able to make this video, which then takes a look at what weapons are the best and which weapons have the most burst and most sustained damage in the game. So without those sheets, these videos, well, they would have been possible, but they would have been really, really difficult to make and would have taken a lot more time. So big thanks to those guys. And for anybody that's unfamiliar with these type of videos, here's the graph that we will be using today, with on the horizontal axis the time passed in seconds, and on the vertical axis the damage dealt, and then times the 100,000. We will go through each weapon class and basically look at each weapon and then put all of those weapons on this graph to see which ones are the best. For example, we can take the ACR assault rifle. If we put that on the graph, it will look something like this, with the diagonal lines implying that a weapon is dealing damage, and thus, you know, the guy is firing it, and the flat lines being the time that the weapon is reloading, and thus not dealing any damage at all. And if we stack up different weapons in the game against each other, you will see which weapon has the highest burst damage, the ones with the steepest diagonal line, and the weapon with the highest sustained damage, the one that comes out on top on the right side of the graph. And we do this for assault rifles, but also for every other weapon class in the game, just to see which weapons you should probably go for. There are, of course, a few things to take in mind, and that is that the values that you see on screen, these numbers, they're useful, I guess, they help, but it isn't the be-all, say-all for every single situation in the game. The graph doesn't take accuracy or stability into account. It doesn't take any special weapon talents into account, which might have a better synergy or that might come with some exotic weapons, which then might make it better or worse. It doesn't take any weapon mods into consideration. It also assumes that you're landing body shots, so no headshots, which then favors, some weapons more than others. And also the damage numbers that you see on screen are the maximum values for the weapons in World Tier 4, unnormalized. I'm sure that once World Tier 5 comes out, all your weapons are going to do more damage than what you can see on screen here, and when you normalize yourself, then you're going to do a lot less damage. So for you, when you're playing, the damage numbers are probably going to be a bit different. But what you have to keep in mind is that relatively the weapons that we put up against each other here, they're always going to be equally strong, no matter in what World Tier you're playing or if you're playing normalized or not. What you see on the graph here is also what you're going to get in the game. It's just that the exact values are going to differ, but relatively it all stays the same. And with all of that out of the way though, I think it's time we just start with the video by taking a look at the assault rifles. We have 11 different types of assault rifles in the game, the ACRs. We have the F2000s, we have the AUG, we have the AKM, we have the FAL or the SA58 as they're called in the game. We have the FAMAS, the M4, the P416, the MK16, the TAR-21, and the G36. Now for simply the highest burst damage assault rifle in the game, we're going to have to go for the FAMAS here, but I myself would not recommend that you go for the FAMAS, because yes, while it has the highest burst damage on the graph here, the FAMAS doesn't actually have a magazine slot. So if we would compare the FAMAS versus other assault rifles with a magazine slot, then the FAMAS will probably always fall short. Maybe still not in burst damage, but definitely in sustained damage. And because of that reason, I would actually recommend the P416, which takes a very, very close number 2 spot in terms of burst damage, and is actually one of the top assault rifles for sustained damage as well, only matched by the AKM. So yeah, for either burst or sustained damage for the assault rifles, just go for the P416. Moving on to the SMGs, we have a lot of SMGs in the game, and I don't think I'm going to individually mention all the names for all the weapons every time we move over to a different weapon class. You can read it for yourself and then look at the colors and you know, check which ones are the best, which is actually also quite difficult on a graph like this, because for one, with so many weapons, we're running out of colors to use that are visible on the screen, but it also just looks like a mess, especially the bottom part of the graph. So I guess what you want to focus on is the outliers. Now for burst damage, the SMG with the highest burst damage is actually the SMG9. But again, I would actually recommend going for the T821, even though the burst damage isn't quite as high as for the SMG9. This is for, I guess, obvious reasons. It's because, well, one, it's very close. It almost has the same amount of burst damage, but it also has, by far, the highest sustained damage of any SMG in the game. The purple line that you see on screen is just miles above the rest here. On top of that, the T821 also has the fastest reload time of any SMG in the game, only matched by the Vector, which is one of the reasons why it also has such a high sustained damage. But those reasons combined, I would say that, yeah, go for the T821 for the sustained damage. And then for burst, I guess you could go for the SMG9, but I would still recommend the T821. The rifle class is the new weapon class, but it has a lot of weapons that we already know from the Division 1 that sort of got a rework or not. And not to my surprise, actually, this is also the class where we see insane differences in the damage that the weapons can deal, because many of the very high RPM rifles that were in the beta for the Division 2 had their RPM lowered going into the final game. And that didn't always go hand in hand with giving them a proper damage buff to compensate for the loss in RPM. And thus, as a result, in the final game, we have a lot of rifles that don't really hit as hard anymore as they did in the beta. And in this case, the clear winner is the MK17, because this weapon does both the most burst damage and also the most sustained damage. There is one downside though, and again, it's with the weapon handling, because the weapon does have a fairly large bloom. So a good alternative would be the SIG if you're trying to play at very long range, or if you just are not a fan of the very large bloom. For LMGs, the picture does seem to be pretty straightforward as well. You either want to pick up the M249 or you want to go for the M60. Either of the LMGs with the large magazines, as they not only provide you with the most sustained damage out of all the LMGs, but to my surprise, they also have the highest burst damage output. So from a numerical point of view, there is no reason to use any other LMG besides these two. In practice though, the RPK and the L86 do have, again, an advantage, which is a tighter reticle, which could be helpful at very long ranges, and the MG5 actually has 85% headshot damage instead of the default 65% that LMGs come with. And there's also a bug with the MG5 to where the optimal range works in the reverse way. The moment that enemies step out of your optimal range, the MG5 actually starts doing more damage. So I guess for longer ranges, the MG5 could also be a decent option. But still, even if we factor those things into account, I'd still say that the M60 or the M249 as a close second place are the best LMGs in the game. For the shotguns, you'll see that the top line, the purple one, is actually the Lullaby exotic shotgun. This is because I did include the exotics that have been found so far into this chart. But I believe that the Lullaby is one of those weapons that's only available to players that pre-ordered some special edition of the game. So for anybody else, I would ignore the purple line for now. It's just there to show the Lullaby, but that's not available for everybody. So for most players, I would just ignore the purple line entirely. Which means that for burst damage, the best shotgun is the double barrel. It's by far the shotgun with the highest burst damage in the game. And then for sustained damage, I would go for the Spaz 12, which is the only shotgun besides the Lullaby in a double barrel that has a DPS that is significantly higher than that of the other shotguns in the game. If you want to play the game on easy mode though, and want an automatic shotgun, I would always say to go for the AA-12, because that's the only automatic shotgun in the game. So I would say the AA-12 isn't a bad option either, and it can actually provide more burst damage than the double barrel even if the target doesn't die after those first two shots that the double barrel can push out. So it's a personal choice here, I'd say, more than anything. Snipers can also be quite deceiving when looking at a chart like this, because the highest burst fire snipers don't actually appear to have much burst at all on a chart like this. So when you want to look for the highest burst sniper in the game, I think you just need to look at the sniper with the highest per bullet damage, which in the case of the Division 2 would be the Model 700, as I'm sure many of you are aware of by now. And then for the highest sustained sniper in the game, on paper, it is the MK20. But the MK20 does actually have a very large bloom, so I would actually recommend going for the SVD because it is a close runner-up. It has more burst damage as well than the MK20, and it also has a much tighter reticle, so it's easier to land shots faster, and also easier to go for headshots more often. Myself, I'm not really a pistol player. I don't really care too much about pistols, so it's hard for me to say which one I would use myself. So I'll just give you the chart and then you can sort of make your own conclusions. I'll just say that the highest burst pistol in the game is the M1911, and the best sustained damage pistol is the PX4. Although, unless you're going for a full shield build, I don't think anybody is going to use a pistol for sustained damage. But hey, at least you have the chart to look at. I decided to not compare the best weapons from each category against each other, because honestly, while it might be cool to look at which weapon has the highest DPS in the game, I don't think it tells you much, and it kind of destroys the purpose of this video, because between weapon classes, the way that they handle and their optimal range and what they can do and what talents they can roll actually makes for a much bigger difference than simply a little bit of a DPS difference. And also, of course, the inherent stat rolls that they come with. Assault rifles, for example, have 30% more damage versus health, which on this graph would then translate into a flat 30% damage increase, which would make assault rifles automatically the best weapons in the game. But that would be quite unfair, wouldn't it? Because you're not always shooting the health. Definitely not. And the crit damage or the crit chance that the SMGs or the rifles come with, how effective those extra stat rolls are is highly dependent on how much critical hit chance or critical hit damage you already have. And of course the snipers, they have the headshot damage. So if we calculate that in, they would skyrocket as well. But then you also can't always land headshots with a sniper consistently if you use the semi-automatic snipers at max RPM. So, comparing the weapons out of different classes straight up, it would mean that the video would simply lose its purpose, because you're not actually getting an idea of, which weapon is the best. It's just you have different weapons for different situations, different classes of weapons. And if you want to make a build around an assault rifle, or around an LMG, or around an SMG, then you can look up this video to see which SMG or assault rifle or LMG is going to be the best. So yeah, quick summary for everybody. For assault rifles, I would go for the P416. For SMGs, I would go for the T821. For the rifles, the clear winner in both burst and sustained damage is the MK17. The best LMG is going to be the M60, but the M249 can be good as well, as it has slightly better handling, so personal preference, I guess. The best overall shotgun in the game, I would say, is the Spes 12. But you can go for the double barrel if you want something with insane burst, or you can go for the AA12 if you want an automatic shotgun that still has very high burst damage. The best bolt action in the game is the Model 700. The best semi-auto sniper is the SVD. And last up, the best pistol for burst damage is the M1911, and the best pistol for sustained damage is the PX4. And that is pretty much going to be it for this video. Before I end it though, a little bit of a shout out to Wobo, another guy on YouTube you might have heard of. He used to do these type of videos for the Division 1, and before making this video I actually asked if he was going to do something like this for the Division 2 as well, but unfortunately he didn't have the time, and I can see why, I guess, because after doing one of these videos myself for the Division 2 now, I can honestly say that these videos take a lot of time to make. All the testing and the comparing and the graphics on screen, so yeah. Just wanted to say thank you to Wobo for doing all that stuff for the Division 1 back in the day. As always, I'll see you all later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.